Laurent and me met in early 1992, and we both came to the Institute for New Media, which was at that time led by Peter Weibel, a very famous Austrian media artist and curator and writer. And we came from different backgrounds. In my case, my background was botany. I studied botany and anthropology in Vienna, and later I studied modern sculpture. But already during my studies in Vienna at the Academy of Fine Arts, I was trying to combine botany and art. And I did this mostly with sculptures, with frottage. I made also paintings. I made different cutouts and even a small publication. So I tried a lot of different materials and methods in order to combine leaf shapes that I took from Carl von Linné, the famous botanist, and artistic interpretation of those leaf shapes. I even made up some kind of pseudoscience, which I called philologia, the science of plants. And I made a whole sort of story and heuristic methodology about leaves, and I tried to put those leaves in different artistic contexts. And when I met Peter Weibel in Frankfurt, actually no, I met him in Vienna, I showed him this project and he told me, you know what, I think for you it would be the best to use the computer, because then you could have these leaf shapes grow. And I didn't know much about computers back then, and I felt like, okay, why not, let's try it. And Peter invited me to Frankfurt, because at that time he was setting up a completely new institute where students could work with advanced computers, computer graphic, and even learn how to program. And then I was lucky that Laurent came just a few months later, and we met there. And Laurent had also a strong interest in growing and also in artistic and biological topics. And then we started to team up and make leaves grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's always a before. So of course we were two artists meeting in 1992, but we had of course a past. And in case of Christa, she went to the fine art, and I also went to a fine art school in Angoulême, in my city, and I studied art, modern art or contemporary art. And then, but then I had something already in my pockets. It's something I learned by myself. It was in the early 90s, there were already small computers, and I had one, and I worked with it. And since I was drawing, since I was a kid, I tried to make art with it already. And my first exhibition was in 1985 with interactive works. So that was the start for me. In 1985, my first exhibition, a public exhibition in my city, in the city hall. And I set up a lot of computers. I worked with my brother, he's an artist as well. So we teamed up, and then we made with a group many sort of machines, interactive floor that would make sound. I was doing poetry, automatic poetry on computer. So generative things, which I didn't know the name. I was just basically alone working and finding out what this machine could do for me in terms of art. I've been working a lot with music as well. And then when I went to the fine art place, there was no computers there, and I tried to bring mine, but it was not really, the professor was not interested. So in a sense, I continued doing this in parallel track. And in the school, I did video art because it was the closest to what I was really interested in. Was not exactly interactive in the sense it's a montage, like you know. So I tried to make it, I find a method. I tried to make it as short as possible. That means one day of filming, one day of montage, one day for the music. And I made small video clips that luckily were also on TV at one point. So there was a dynamics there, and I thought this is the way to go, but not in the video field, because the video was a static thing, and what I wanted to have is a living thing. So it's something that is interactive, like in my exhibition. So when I went to the Frankfurt school, I had already an idea that I want to do something interactive, and I looked at what Peter Weibel was offering, and they were the machines that I was looking for. They were very special machines. You couldn't find them elsewhere. You could not buy them. So I had already 10 years of programming behind me with small machines that evolved quickly. Every year there were new models. So I was ready to do something. And when I met Christa, I found there's a nice bond there, because I've been working also with natural elements, with a lot of things. We had something in common. And when we came together, this project took form. It was the interactive plant growing that exactly matched all our background.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, it was also an exhibition opportunity, because I had already an exhibition opportunity in Vienna at the Salle de Bal. It was an exhibition about young Austrian artists, and there was even a small budget, so we had a fixed deadline. And my original plan was to make an animation of leaves that move a little bit like in the wind, and the leaves, they are based on this Carl from Linné system, leaf classification system. But then Laurent came up with this idea of how about we make it interactive. So during the whole summer we tinkered and we experimented, and I designed some leaves, or I told Laurent, or together we sort of looked of how these leaves could look. And then Laurent came up with this idea, okay, we could have these leaves growing in real time by actually connecting them to real plants. And so out of this experiment, a project developed that later became very popular, called interactive plant growing. And it was really the starting point also of our artistic collaboration.
Yeah, so I was talking about the technology, and my first computer was a ZX81 from Sinclair. It was one of the cheapest computer you could buy. It's a full-fledged computer. You have a screen. I mean, it didn't come with a screen. You had to connect to the TV of the parents, of course. But then I occupied quite a lot of space during the day. It was a very simple one, but it's a starting point. It was a starting point, and it's black and white. So it's very tiny, but it offered already basic programming, and this is how I got to learn it. It's the ZX81 has the date in it. It was out in 1981, and it couldn't do much. It was basically text-based, but this is where I did the automatic poetry on it, because it could generate text, and therefore you could actually manipulate letters and characters to make poems in continuous way. So it's generating all day something. But then sound was interesting for me. I started electronics in 1976. I remember very well, because it was an extremely hot week. It was one of these waves of overheating that started in 1976 in France, at least in my region. And then we were stuck in the house, and I started to dismantle a lot of old radios that nobody was using, and started to make sound machines, so that you can make oscillators with very little amount of components, and with loudspeakers. And I learned by myself, by experimenting. I didn't have very much guidance. So, but you could build things, and in the end of the 70s, everything was analog in the sound. It was still synthesizers, Moog synthesizers, and all these things. So you could build, if you wanted to, all the elements of sound machines, so like filters and amplifiers and oscillators, all that with small means. I mean, not a lot of money. It was all components that I took from other machines. I learned a lot from this, but when I started to have computer, I wanted to bring the two things together. Luckily, the music field started to be the first one to be digitalized. The sound, really, the digital sound started in the early 80s. You started to have synthesizers, a lot of things started to come up. And there was a computer in 1985, I think it was called CMX CX5M. I think it's the right things. It's from the MSX, it's from Yamaha. And they could drive, they had a synthesizer on board, a very good one. And then you could also have MIDI connections, which was also very new at that time. So sound production started to really take a serious turn. Then you could manipulate sound differently than just trying to connect things, because on stage it's really difficult to rearrange the sounds. There you had the possibility to have a more structured sound system. And I started also to experiment with that. I put the computers together. We made a lot of concerts. It was kind of impromptu. So it's like trying to improvise something with this structured machine. So algorithm basically was driving us, the musicians, or the opposite was driving the machines. And so this interplay was in 85, 86. I started to do this with the band. We had a small band with some analog instruments. Yeah, we always managed to make something. And so this was a lot of experiments, but a lot of this experience was nourishing. Also, what can you really do? The exploration of the small things that you could manage to have together, but then make something bigger out of it. And this love for randomness was really growing in me, really, and live performance as well. And I thought these machines should be live, it should be tested. And that's why in 1985 I decided to make everything interactive rather than a program that will do something, and some graphics and playback. So this was the means. For the video, well, it was Humatic at this time, and fortunately the school had quite a good equipment. They got this equipment from a TV studio, and so we had a chroma key. We had a lot of things that we can experiment, and started to play with that as well. So in all these video clips that I've made, about 10, there is always an element of partly digital. I could connect some computers to make the pictures, but also live shooting. And so this was a mixture between the two. But I really saw that this is not the field I want to continue. I really want to have something more generative.
Before I went to Frankfurt, I was in Vienna able to get some also video equipment. And at that time I remember it was mostly from the University of Angewandte. Somehow I managed to borrow sometimes some machines, some big cameras. I think it was Humatic camera back then. And I filmed leaves, and I was also like experimenting with overlays and so on. And I was able to use the video studio there as well. But then when I went to Frankfurt, as Peter Weibel suggested, it was time to learn how to use a computer. And I remember that we had this Wavefront, I think it was Wavefront animation software, and it was quite complicated. It was not so easy. So we had someone, I think it was Ake Wagener, who was also an artist. She was teaching us how to use this software. And then we also had programming classes. And I remember vividly that we had to learn this Unix. It was also quite complicated. And so I was making some small leaf animations. I must have them still somewhere, where those leaves that I modeled first, they could be moved around. And that already was for me quite incredible, because before, I was just filming leaves or drawing them or making abstracted cutouts. But seeing them actually move on a computer was something that was quite satisfying. But then later, when Laurent suggested that we grow these leaves, then we really started to not animate them, but let them grow algorithmically with the software that Laurent produced.
Actually, you programmed it.
Programmed it,
yes.
Yeah.
What kind of program was that?
So until I came to the Institute of New Media, there was I only worked on smaller machines with BASIC. That was the language. Or there's another one that is much harder to do. Is called the machine language. So assembly code. And assembly code is directly talking to the processor. And so this was to gain some speed, because the machines were really slow, and sometimes for the sound I had to produce faster programs. For the production of the artworks that I was doing. And when I went to the Institute of Media, there were the Silicon Graphics machines. I think it was Personal Iris, the machines that they were there. And then I got confronted with C programming, which I didn't know. But programming is a change of language, but languages have similar structures. The math is the same. Basically, all these algorithms you can implement from language to language. It's not really big deal. That's more or less new keywords to learn. And then there was another language that was really interesting, a library. It's called the Graphic Library from Silicon Graphic, GL. And that allowed you to write in 3D. So that was the great discovery for me. It's that, you can actually program things to be in third dimension. I had already made animation in 3D in the year before in an institute in Angoulême that was really quite modern as well, and they let us use the computers. And but it was animation again, so you had to prepare, you had to model things with the software, and then you animate it. So this is really the standard way. But when you program in 3D, it's completely free. You have a space that is immense, and you can build any kind of things. And it's like a mesh. You can. Well, there was no texture on this machine. You can shade it, have something look quite realistic. And then the idea was to model a plant. But a plant is one of the hardest things to model. Really. It's not easy to model at all.
There are so many types of plants.
It's really difficult. It's really complex shapes, really a lot of things. And so try to find out, okay, how do you start? And there was a little booklet, because there was no internet, of course, in 92. There was just a little booklet from Silicon Graphics showing you how to make a cube, how to make a bowl, how to make a circle, and a few other things programmatically. But that was about it. And out of this thing, try to manage to make something moving and grow. And there were two accidents that happened. One is that I tried to move a sphere, and then it did a trace instead of making a ball that moves. It's actually kept the old object and then grew. And that gave me the idea that you can actually make tubes. So out of like extrusion, that's the standard way how to do an object in the computer. You take a circle and then you extrude it, then you get a tube. And then this tube, you can grow it. And that was the starting point. So it was like, it's possible. And then the second thing is, okay, how do you make this kind of shape expand? But this I took it from the music, what I was doing before. Because in music, you have several things happening always. It's an orchestration. You have sounds, and you have to put them in time. And it's a special programming technique. Programming is one thing at a time, but when you have to do several things, you have to plan up differently your program. And so I implemented this to make several things happening at the same time. And all these tubes were actually changing shapes as they grew. So it's of course not how the plant is growing, but it gives you this sense of time and development. And the picture was also rather complex for the time, because it's only keeping traces of what you do. So you don't have to manipulate a lot of things. Basically, these machines, they could only animate like 3 or 4 cubes in real time, but that was about it. But as the trace was left, it was a 3D picture that could develop and stay stable, and everything could be filled up indefinitely. So really a lot of leaves, shapes, and everything. So this was fantastic. It was like a discovery, and we had only like 2 months to make this. It was during the summer holidays, and the machines were usually busy, but in that summer we were free to use it.
Yeah, we worked night and day.
So we worked night and day, but there was another thing. It was the interface to develop for that, to make the plant also interactive. And I used what I knew from amplification, filtering, all these things, but it was also new to me to just connect a plant and then try to get some information from it. The experiment took like a month to be built, and started to find out that, you can actually find around the plant a field, an electrical field, with very, very extremely sensitive amplification. You could actually see if a person is approaching or even touching the plant, and then you get signals. And that was the starting point. So we just duplicate this principle and have 5 plants responding to people. Then I had to connect, of course, this interface to the Silicon Graphics and learn how to actually communicate. So everything was starting from scratch, basically. It was really out of what we knew. Christa was also helping designing the growth of the plants. I was doing the algorithm, so it was a back and forth thing. So in the programming.
Yeah, I mean, what I mostly did is, since I had this botanical knowledge and knew, about a lot about like the classification of plants and also the growth pattern. So I remember I took one of my botany books and looked at types of plants, and then we decided, okay, let's for example have a plant that takes a lot of space, like ivy, or another one that is maybe more like covering the floor. So I looked at different actually real models of real plants and tried to recreate similar ones on the computer. So I was sitting there modifying the parameters of the growth algorithms that Laurent designed, and then also decide, of course, the colors and the changes of colors, so it looks as much as possible realistic to real plants, while at the same time also is a kind of abstraction of plants. So there was a lot of botanical somehow influence on the way we designed these plants. And then also for the inscenation of how to present this work, we had a room, a very nice room at the French Institute. It was at the Salle de Bal, a very beautiful old building. I think it was a stable before.
In Vienna.
So in Vienna. And then we decided, since I had this background in modern sculpture and mostly installation art, so we decided to make a nice installation where these plants, real plants, are staged in the space on pedestals with a good lighting, and also, a nice projection screen, so to make this sort of a bit mysterious looking space where you enter and you see plants and the screen, and then, when people interact with them, then something would happen and grow on the screen. So there's a lot of different previous knowledge of how to inscenate, but also botanical knowledge, and in Laurent's case, of course, the performative and also programming knowledge. So all these things somehow came together and matched in this project. We showed the interactive plant growing the first time in autumn 1992, and the project is still shown today. It's still the same software, but of course the technology has changed. So instead of using lithographics, it's now running on PCs. Instead of showing it on or projecting it on like 3-beam projector from back then, it's now shown on normal LCD projectors. Then it's also the interface. We made several new versions, but the principle of the growing and the algorithms and also the design of the plants is still the same. So when you see it now, maybe the image looks a bit sharper than it used to look back then, but we keep the overall design pretty much similar to as it was before in 1992.
Yes, we decided to keep this kind of original look, if we can call it this way. In original things, it doesn't make sense in the digital form, but in a sense that we don't want to add more something on the picture that was not there before. And this started really because this project has been shown many times over the years. So it has been always shown nearly every year. So of course the technology was changing. I had ported some part of the program to run on the machines, but we wanted to keep the feeling that the first people saw in 1992, how they saw the piece in 1992. So it's still possible to have that, and of course you have to evolve. But you can't keep the old machines; they won't run for a long time, and it would be possible, but it would be just like running after something that disappears. So it's really not possible. And so we kept this idea for all our pieces. Actually, any time that they have to be changed or ported to some other technology, we try to keep it in the same form. So it is not faster, not more beautiful, more
graphics.
Yeah, no more graphics. I slow down the program because it now runs faster, so I have to slow it down. But try to keep the pace as it was. And I find this is maybe it's out of honesty, but it's also, you could always change something forever. So it's not. It has been decided during that exhibition that it should be looking like this. So let's keep it this way. And that's how we deal with this.
But we did some changes, like for example, we had this big retrospective called The Artwork as a Living System now in the last couple of years. And originally we had interactive plant growing always in a completely dark room. We even painted the walls black and only had the screen white. But this was mostly because the projectors were not very strong back then, and if you paint the walls black, then the image looks more crisp and more intense. But nowadays the projectors are so good that you can even show interactive plant growing in a room that has quite a lot of light. So we are not insisting anymore that you have to paint all the walls black. I mean, it looks of course more as it used to be, but so some changes like this we also accepted. Or for example, we have also changed some plants. Originally we used, I think, always a fern, a real fern, but then we found out when people are touching too much or when it's too hot, the fern dies too quickly, so sometimes we now use a kind of palm tree instead, but it looks still similar to a fern. So some changes has happened, but overall the feeling or the impression stays more or less the same as it used to be in 92. After interactive plant growing, we really saw that interactivity is something that we like, and this audience participation. So we came up with a second project that was realized in 1994 called Evolve. And here the idea was artificial life, which was at that time also a topic at Ars Electronica, and many people talked about genetic programming and artificial life methodology. And so we came up with this idea of a pool that is filled with water, and people can draw some forms on a touchscreen and then see this form become alive in the pool, where these forms, they look a bit like jellyfish, swim around and propagate. They make children, but they also kill each other, and people could also intervene in the system and interact with these creatures, we call them. So this was also a very successful project, which even got the Golden Nika, I think, in 1994. And then for many years we kept on working on artificial life, genetic programming, always with this idea of interaction and artworks that change when people interact with them. So for many years we were active in this field of artificial life art and interactivity. Later we also did projects more in this field of complexity, complex images. We made projects where you could, for example, talk to interface, and then images from the internet would be streamed and you could interact with these images. This was mostly at the time when we worked in Japan at ATR Research Laboratory, where we also invented new interfaces and even applied for some patents. Then for some years we also worked on mobile interfaces, like experiments in mobile interaction. And when we moved back here to Linz in 2004, we started to also do projects in the field of more media archaeology, like for example use old typewriters, old radios, old projectors, and combining different media archaeological devices with interactivity. And most recently we have been also doing a lot of screen-based works, where you see, for example, your portrait being displayed with a lot of flies or with some plants. So these ideas of plants and insects and interactivity has been something that we explored for many years as well.
Yes, there was also an experiment in the mid-90s about the third dimension, where you could get integrated, you could see yourself within the environment, the three-dimensional picture. So you see the projection, but you are inside. And I made an interface called, we call it 3D key. It's a keying machine that takes your picture, but put it inside. And then you can navigate, and then you will be crossing different elements in the picture. So we could grow plants, for example, and you will be navigating in the plant in the forest. You could also grow the forest as you move. So it was an experiment. We did several iterations of that, and it was really, for me, very interesting, because the third dimension, we think it's modern, but it was already in the daguerreotype in 1890. So it's, the two shots that you take with photo camera at that time, stereo pictures, and then you had a small machine you could see through, and then you see the picture in 3 dimensions. That was already there, and people had already that idea. So the only thing with a computer, you could extract that structure, like the third dimension, from these two pictures with using an algorithm, and then you had that layer on the picture, and then you could explore the picture. So we did also photographic old photograph and recompose the third dimension and let people explore that picture by being inside the picture. This was several experiments that led us to think that there's so much to explore in this domain. This is incredible because it's a space, and this space has time. It has, for example, evolution was really interesting too because we got rid of the design. When you design something, it's fixed, but evolution can change that to something else with a logical change. It's not arbitrary, and it also reflects time and also the opportunities of this object to be in a context. So it reflects the context as well. It reflects the interaction with people. So it's really interesting how you can, with this method, because it's basically evolution is a method, you can apply it in a computer. Strangely enough, it's a principle. And then you can take this principle and put it back into your environment and try to see how it goes. And this is open-ended. It's not that you start with something, but you may end up with something else. And this is exactly what we were so fascinated with, because it's putting us, the artists, a little bit away from the system, but then let really the people shape the entire thing. And that's really, for us, very important, to let some freedom to the art piece and not to just lock it up to a specific outcome. And so today we do it differently. We don't use so much genetic algorithm and use more like complexity to generate millions of things at the same time. The computer is fast, so you can manipulate 10,000 flies if you want to, and then have them interact at the same time. Now, this was not possible before, but today it's possible, and so this is still keeping the evolution of computing, but having a different view towards it. We are also interested to reflect how people are within this digital dimension, and maybe give them back some images of themselves.
When we talk about the public in interactive artworks, it's of course for us always very fascinating and also gratifying to see how people somehow with the body, like with physical interaction, get somehow attached or involved in the creation of the artwork. And we really enjoy this moment of when you get into the work as a visitor and, explore. And our principle is to not make it all completely fixed beforehand. So it's like just a logical step of, following A, B, C, D, E. But that people really improvise and explore this by themselves and discover also the layers of interaction by themselves. And especially children are, of course, very good and very fast to understand this and get involved. But even like at the beginning, I remember in the 90s, often the critic from more artistic people was like, oh, this is too playful, this is not art. And, because it's so entertaining, it can't be art. But this fortunately has changed now, so I think people are now much more ready to get involved in an interactive artwork and not automatically criticize it as being too, playful or too entertaining or too, interactive. So in that sense, I think the public has changed too. And it's quite the opposite. I think now people are quite ready to see interactive artworks. And also start to, let themselves a bit more go into the system and maybe try to understand the message that you want to say with these works.
Well, I have an anecdote. It was more child play, but I built a kind of machine for my sister. I was just like 8-9 years old, and she was much younger than me, to show that I made a machine to go back in time. And so I made a kind of installation where I had, I found some old Röntgen, the radios, the bones, something from my mother. I think she had the skeleton, you could see the bones really clearly on that black thing. So I made it like a TV. It's black if you don't put any light. And I put a light behind that I could switch on. And then I wanted to make some sounds of dinosaurs or something, but I put a loudspeaker in a kind of barrel that was made out of, it was a kind of washing powder barrels, that these things of the 70s that we had, and a loudspeaker inside. connected to a power supply. And then I explained to her, I made her sit and see this kind of installation. We were in the dark, and my sister made a kind of installation. And then I said, look, we are going back in time. And then I just turned on the picture and started to light up. And then you see the bones. And then the loudspeaker start to make a lot of sound. And my sister starts to be really scared. And then just she left. And then smoke came out of this barrel, really in a big amount of smoke because the loudspeaker burned completely. And I thought, this is fantastic. For my sister, little. But for me, it was like, you can really make something that captivates with just little things, like here a little bit of a TV, a little bit of switches, electricity, power supply. That's good. That's maybe the real starting point of the whole adventure.
Mysterious machines. In my case, it's maybe more like I grew up in a very beautiful area in Austria, in the Salzkammergut, which is like very beautiful lakes, mountains, fantastic nature, wonderful botanical, rarities. And also my parents both like to hike a lot and go out on the weekends. And especially my father was very, very much knowledgeable about plants. So often he would show me, this plant's name is so-and-so, and this plant is so-and-so. And so already quite early on, I think maybe with 5 or 6, I started to make my own herbarium, like, picking up plants and collecting them and writing the names, at least as far as I knew. So this love for nature was always something I really enjoyed a lot. And also growing up in this beautiful, very beautiful natural environment was a big impact for me. And also, of course, drawing was always my favorite subject in school. And also English and also botany and biology. So these things was clear to me that I wanted to do something in this direction. And so I think I always had the feeling I want to do something with plants. And actually I also ended up studying plant science, botany. And artistic background, I always loved it, but I was not so encouraged to study it. But then as later I was admitted in the art school, it was also for me always clear that I want to combine these two things. And coming to media art was actually a bit more by accident. It was more like this is a suggestion of Peter Weibel, because he said, if you want to grow these plants, and that was my main motivation, then you have to use computers. So it was not my plan in the very beginning to, start working with computers. It was more like it happened in a way. So, but with this combination of art and technology and natural sciences, I think it really made a lot of sense to combine these different interests. And so it was more like a growing process in itself.